Welcome to Backstory and Beyond with your host, Ward Kampf, seeker, innovator, and president of Northwood Retail. As Ward travels the country, he'll share the industry insights he's gained over a 3 decades-long retail career, introduce you to trailblazing business leaders and disruptive founders, and uncover the real deal about some of the greatest cities in the world. This week, Ward drives down to Austin to see Paul Hedrick, founder of Tecovas, the world's fastest-growing Western wear brand. They'll discuss Paul's approach to radical hospitality, Tecovas' evolution from DTC to brick-and-mortar, and what the award-winning television show Yellowstone has done for the brand. All that and more on this episode of Backstory and Beyond.
I'm in Austin, Texas today with Paul Hedrick, founder of Tecovas Western Wear. Thanks for being here today. I know you're busy.
Really glad to be here, Ward. Thanks for having me.
Paul has created the fastest growing Western wear brand in the world. So I'll get into a little of the backstory and I'll let you take it from there. You end up going to Harvard.
That's right.
And you spend 2 years consulting or in private equity. And I believe you were applying for business school and you took a turn, right?
That's right. Yeah, I grew up in Dallas. My first job out of college was actually at a consulting firm at McKinsey. I moved back to Dallas for about 2 years, and then I really wanted to get into retail and brands. I was sort of obsessed with brands as a kid, and I always had the car magazine, the science magazine, the gear magazines, and I really wanted to get into, I thought, restaurants actually. So I applied for a job at what was called Catterton Partners at the time.
Yeah.
Now they're called L. Catterton. They were big restaurant investors, among other things. Applied to Harvard and Stanford business schools. Did not even get an interview at either of them. And then I decided to give my life a little bit of examining and actually really just determined that, hey, I might have the entrepreneurial bone. I had never really thought about it too much before. I realized I had a high risk tolerance. I had a creative side. And in a good position, felt like the right time to jump into the deep end.
One of the things I always think about cowboy boots are very utilitarian. You see people wearing them with suits and everyday work gear, and women are wearing them fashionable, et cetera. Why'd you decide to get into cowboy boots and Western wear?
One of the bigger reasons I decided to ultimately become an entrepreneur was because I wanted to scratch this sort of right brain side of me that I had sort of laid dormant for a little while. When I was growing up as a kid, I wanted to be an artist. I think at some point I wanted to be a cartoonist. I was an illustrator and a painter. I'd done theater and I played piano my whole life. I always considered myself more naturally a creative. And, for better or for worse, it was never the thing that I was best at. So I was never good enough to, be a professional musician, professional artist, I didn't think. And so when I went to school, I studied economics and math and got into the business side. But man, I just had this part of me. And if I could find a way to merge it into my business life, then I knew I could be potentially a lot happier. And I wanted to start a company. I wanted to start a brand. I wanted to start a product brand. I was wearing boots a lot. And the thing that appealed to me about them, other than looking into the industry and feeling like something was missing, was honestly the story. And at least for me, out of all the things that I could have picked up and worn in my closet, the boots were the only thing that drew a story out of people and drew this connection into, where'd you get those? Why do you have those? Are they old? Are they new? A lot of people have boots that last a generation or two. And, that's an interesting story behind that. And so I actually designed all of our product for the first 4 years. I sketched, mostly hand drew, sketched them. I didn't really know how to use professional design software. I think at one point I had sketched all this stuff and then I couldn't figure out how to get it into a PDF. And so I took a picture of it and then in Microsoft Paint actually traced my original sketch into lines that roughly mapped. And that was technically our first design file, I think, was a hand-drawn sketch with Microsoft Paint. A little bit of bootleg, but there's not some bootleg stories in your past, then you're really an entrepreneur.
So in 2015, I believe, is when this kind of really, you were kind of born.
Yeah, I moved to Austin 10 years ago in 2014 and started working on it full time then. And launched in October 2015.
And I think as you started, you just threw them in your SUV and went to farmers markets and just kind of word of mouth. That's how brands get big.
Doing things that don't scale, I think, is really important. And it sounds counterintuitive, and you probably hear a lot of founders say that, do things that don't scale. The things that don't scale are obviously not what scales you. But it's the mindset and the learning that you get out of those.
Yeah.
And a little bit of the grit. And yeah, we were selling boots out of my old SUV at farmers markets and whatnot. And that was not what was scaling the brand.
Right.
We were not going from 0 to 10 million, just scanning boots in my SUV. But we were actually paying some bills. But more importantly, we were face to face with the customer every day, got selling mentality. We were willing to do every task imaginable, which meant our team could scale pretty efficiently and effectively. We did not have a big team when we were doing relatively high revenue numbers because everyone on the team was willing to do any job. Specific things that don't scale, they teach valuable lessons, and the lessons are what you can scale.
And, on the high end, you've got Lucchese up here, you've got Boot Barn over here, and then you have all the independents like Allen, Pinks, all those guys. But you wanted to be direct to consumer. You wanted to be the DTC brand. And I think that's where retail is going. And so just talk a little bit about full head down, going into that space. And you also saw you could produce something at a price with a lot of value that's high quality.
Yeah. So as I looked at the market, first decided that Western might be an interesting category to dig into. And I didn't know much about the business side of it. I was a consumer of it. I was wearing boots in New York, actually, sort of the token Texan move. But now there were two things I would say that I realized. One, that there was a marketplace innovation that seemed to be happening in other categories, which was this D2C model. But more importantly, that there was just a brand missing in this category. There wasn't really kind of a super premium play that would appeal to millennials. And so, yeah, that's I was kind of sitting in the millennial bell curve and like, man, I have a picture of these boots that I want, this brand that I want, this experience that I want, and it's just not there. And so the D2C model was the way that I just decided to go about it, because at the time, this was when the kind of the wave of D2C brands were starting, and it felt like the math could work. I could go figure out where the best product in the world was made, design it myself, sell it direct to consumer, and maybe cut out a keystone in there. Of course, over the last 10 years, we've realized that the D2C model is actually quite challenging, and that, when you're replacing a keystone with marketing costs and ballooned overhead, it doesn't necessarily work out to be easier to do. So everyone kind of reverts toward the mean in the end. But if you can deliver a great product at a reasonable value and you've got strong enough margins to grow and pursue your marketplace strategy, then you should be in a good position to win. So focus really on the product and the experience, and knowing that the consumer ultimately, individually, was going to have to fall absolutely in love with this brand. We were going to try to make an impact on a category that had existed for almost 140 years. And in order to do that, you have to do a lot right. You have to nail the product. It's got to fit and feel amazing. It's got to look amazing. And the experience from learning about the brand all the way to wearing the boots for a year or two needs to be pretty much perfect. And so we really focus on all those consumer touch points, and being direct helped us focus on those, because all we thought about every day was that individual and their experience.
So you went to León, Mexico, and that's kind of the leather capital of the world for cowboy boots, I believe.
Yeah, it was interesting. I got kind of lucky in that, I didn't really have much sourcing or design or development experience. And I really did it all on my own. I was pretty naive. I didn't hire a sourcing agent. I didn't hire a designer or a developer. I made a bunch of cold calls actually to custom boot makers, and kind of cried for help a little bit. And a lot of people pointed me in the direction of this one city in Mexico, which became very clearly the right place to look. It's where the vast majority of Goodyear welted footwear in the Western Hemisphere is made. That's where every other premium Western brand was making their product. And I wanted the best. And so that's where they were. So yeah, I booked a one-way ticket at one point and had a meeting with a factory, and they actually rejected me and sent me across the street. And ended up getting passed along again to a third factory by the time we launched, and luckily it worked out. But yeah, that's where we still make the vast majority of our product.
Well, it sounds like anytime you've had setbacks, you've been able to pivot around. I mean, you love problem solving and just driving through it, you know.
Well, when you give yourself no other option other than to succeed, you're surprised at how much you can dig out.
You know, I think actually that's the most interesting piece, because a lot of people think all the money in the world will get you to the right place. I think money can kill creativity.
Looking back on the first 3 or 4 years of building Tecovas, and we had pretty explosive growth in those years, I think I underestimated just how important our cash management skills were. Yeah, we only consumed a couple million in cash on our way to get to tens of millions in revenue. And it was all because of just managing the cash cycle and me trying to get to the absolute last day. I'd call the factory and be like, all right, I know you want me to place an order this far in advance, but how about we just talk about the number of boots first, and then at a later date, I'll tell you what the colors will be. And then at a later date, I'll tell you what the size curve will be. So we could be just in time with all of our orders, because when you're in the footwear business, there's thousands of SKUs. There's 30 sizes for every men's boot that we make. You want to have the exact curve ready for your consumers. So yeah, kind of amazing how much we were able to manage that. And then on the revenue and marketing side, we were every week, every day looking at our inventory curves, deciding how much we could afford to spend on advertising just that day. We were never like blanketing over a month or a quarter for that matter. It was always almost like a trading operation. And now that I look at brands who are trying to start now, and they look at what we did, and they kind of see at the surface, what the results were, they assume that, you build it, they will come, and you raise the capital round, and it'll be easy to put to work. And I think I'm realizing just how challenging a lot of those decisions were. And we didn't have an excess capital. I mean, very few people wanted to invest in this business. I mean, it looked like a niche business to many people. And it wasn't until we got to tens of millions in revenue in just, 3 years that people really realized, like, wait, there's actually a pretty big market to be captured here.
Well, first of all, footwear is one of the hardest to do by far in retail because of what you said, inventory, SKUs. And then, I do think a lot of retailers, like you said, startups especially, are on this high of, I got the first round, I can get the second round, another down round. And so. But
you know what it is too? It's also just sales. I mean, You got to be obsessed with selling your product. Our whole culture was built around sell, sell, sell. And, we knew we had an amazing product, so it was easy to get behind it. But we were always slinging boots. We made sure that we had an event every week. We made sure we were keeping the lights on with trunk shows, and nothing was guaranteed.
And scaling is hard to do, but that is, to me, kind of where it gets interesting, right?
Totally.
And you probably see a lot of businesses or knockoffs or people that are trying to knock you off every day,
We call them ankle biters, there's a lot of them out there, and we've always been blinders on in our category, and it kind of goes part and parcel with how we run the company. We have an internal pillar called Radical Hospitality, and we really try to take that pillar into how we approach competition as well. We're hospitable, we're friendly, we're not going to be the people starting wars.
Every once in a while, one of those will be real, and it'll fire you up. It'll get you. It'll get you in that mode of like.
Well, we want competition too. Like we've grown quite a bit, and we want the category to keep growing, and we want there to be players representing different parts of that category, and kind of horses for courses, and we certainly want to be the most dominant player in premium Western, but in order to do that, it's nice to have competition. Actually, we've got a little block over here on South Congress that's filled with competition right now, and in Austin, and we like it. We've welcomed the competition. I'd rather be a center for people who have interest in the category, and then play fair, win our fair share of that of those consumers. I
always say, people that realize your mentality that there's a big pie.
Yeah,
I want to share the pie. I think people that have the pie's all mine, they eventually lose it. That's a mentality some people have, but as long as the pie's growing, the share's growing, and you're the dominant player, like you said, I think that's what you're shooting for, right?
Yeah, and you've got to have a confidence that you're going to win.
Yeah.
The certain number of those people, right?
Yeah.
When you feel really good about having product market fit, that the thing you're putting on the shelf is still getting better every year, is comfortable, stylish, sharp, then yeah, you'll be okay.
It's kind of walking back. I remember some friends of mine from Ohio State came down to Austin for a game, and it was like 2006. They called me and said, "Hey, what's the deal with all the girls that are wearing the cowboy boots with the mini skirts?" And that's kind of when it was just starting, right? And then 2015 on, country and Western really started to take off with the big guys, the Luke Combs, and now you have Lainey Wilson on the women's side, who's just huge. But I mean, you really started to have these bigger players in country and Western. That started to take off. I'm sure that probably played into part of your business. And then obviously the pandemic. So,
yeah, when I think about the category dynamics, I mean, I've only been a part of it for 10 years, so can't really speak to the 90s and 2000s too much, but it has been a really steadily growing and large category for a long time. I believe it was growing at a low to mid single digit rate from even the late 90s through the early 2000s and mid aughts into the early 10s. It was always about a $3+ billion category just for cowboy boots in the US, and now it's probably about $4 billion. I think I look back on it and it was relatively good timing to get started in the mid-teens. Pickup trucks have been the most popular car in America for 20 plus years. Country music, actually well before the 2020s, was the number one favorited genre in America since I think the mid to late aughts, and really in the 2010s, as you pointed out, started to break out, and you started to get more of the superstars, kind of akin to the 90s when Garth and Shania were dominating, and get asked a lot about what Yellowstone did for the brand and that the Yellowstone effect, if you will. And it's interesting. Yellowstone in particular was good for us. We were actually a sponsor of the show, and that was probably the best advertising dollars we ever spent. So I will definitely give credit where credit is due. But it wasn't as spiky for us as it felt to everyone else. It almost felt like the public all thought that this trend was taking over like a tidal wave. But we just kind of saw business as usual. We were growing strong. I think what happened when Western becomes more interesting to more people in this kind of trendy way, you see more of the non-Western brands adopt Western silhouettes, and that's actually where a lot of the interest flows. But then we're around for the authentic play. Us and the brands that have existed for a long time, will be the destination that you go to when you don't want to have the X fashion brand version of the cowboy boot. So I'd say, long story short, we all had pretty good timing with everything. I wouldn't say that it's contributed to a significant part of our growth. Most of our growth has actually just come from, I think, taking the share of the category that already existed and executing really well, having a marketplace strategy in our retail stores balanced by online that ended up being what the consumer wanted. And we were kind of showing up where they wanted to shop. And yeah, we were sort of winning on product market fit.
As I think about it, fashion's really started to flip into Western. And, this year it's going to be suede. It's going to be corduroy is huge. That's a big break because athleisure wear had just been going. And, baggy jeans are taking over on one side. And then the Western wear, it's having a moment, especially on the women's side.
Yeah, and women are driving a lot of growth right now for us and for the category, I think. But I couldn't be more excited about our positioning and the positioning of just Americana and denim. And, you had to take a stand, right, at some point. And, when you saw the country, when everyone was sitting on their couch wearing stretchy pants, we had to be the brand saying, no, we're not going to be the brand selling stretchy pants. We're selling jeans and boots. And at some point you got to have faith that look is going to be part of the American diaspora of style, and people are going to gravitate toward it. And I believe that Western has come fully into the American closet. And I think we're at that point where now pretty much everyone's going to have a black pair of boots and a brown pair of boots in their closet, a pair of jeans that they can wear with those boots. More people have pearl snaps on their shirts than they ever had before, and I think those are going to be elements of the American wardrobe. I'm willing into existence.
Yeah. Well, I think look, even Beyonce came out into the Western world. You get Chris Stapleton. I mean, it had an influence, but I think country and Western has always been the fabric
I think there's a bigger desire in recent years to define what it means to be American. And
Right.
there's almost like a mental draw and a psychological draw toward that. And people, want to feel connected. And I think one way to feel connected is through Americana and feeling comfortable. And everyone likes it. It's kind of one of those things. Everyone can appreciate Beyonce and Post Malone. And,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's a human instinct right now almost.
Yeah, it's crazy how people have just gravitated to it. At 42 stores, the fastest growing Western brand in the world, any thoughts that this brand goes bigger than the States?
We're excited about going outside the States. We don't have plans for it just yet. We actually decided to prioritize our wholesale rollout first. So we're just launched wholesale initiatives. So actually you can find us in a bunch of independent Western stores now, kind of as a test throughout mostly the Southeast and Texas and a little bit of the Midwest.
And then just the way you started, online to brick and mortar, you take the kind of hospitality service approach. You have a bar in there, the stores.
The truth is at the beginning, we were all D2C on Tecovas.com for 3.5 years. And I just wanted stores because of the hospitality reason, for the customer experience reason. I liked the idea of creating physical space that was a full embodiment of the brand. And to me, as the brand creator, all I wanted to see was the maximum experience of the brand. What is the epitome of the Tecovas experience? And ultimately, to me, that wasn't showing up at your front door in a FedEx box, because that's just not what really people want. They don't want one boot there, got to get the box cutter out and we're not sure it quite fits right, but it's the only one you ordered. And don't get me wrong, that'll be an important part of our business and it will be moving forward for good. But that was the original reason, was just, man, we love delighting customers. How much more we'll be able to delight them with the physical space. And so, in 2019, we opened our first store here in Austin in March. And it did so well that we said, how many can we open this year? Like literally like maximum feasible. And I said, all right, it's about 5. We can open 5. And we opened 5 stores in our first year. And then in February 2020, I signed 10 retail leases. So I was the one who kind of looked like I had egg on my face, from March to May 2020. We had a tough few months, but I ended up opening every store that we had signed leases for, and including a couple with y'all. I think the Domain Northside store was actually the first official post-pandemic store that we opened. The stores have been a really good thing for the brand and the experience and sort of the subjective side of building the brand. But objectively now, it's where the majority of our revenue comes from as well. So we're obviously very happy that we have them.
And then the women's shift, when did you see that coming? How quick did you know that was going to?
Yeah, so we were a vast majority men's sales. We always had women's boots, but men's I got like over 80% of our business for a while, probably 4+ years, if not 5 or 6. Really, honestly, we just started doing a better job with the line. We stopped treating it like a, kind of a men's junior, and we started making pretty boots. Right. We weren't just making your basic browns and blacks and round toes. We started making more trend-driven styles, but ironically, those trend-driven styles that we thought were trendy are now volume and evergreen styles for us. And so, we got better at designing and merchandising. Now, we're still a majority men's, but the growth is largely driven by women's right now.
And then the name Tecovas, that does come from
that does come from West Texas. Yeah. Man, it's hard to name a company.
Yeah. And I believe it's a geological formation out there.
That's right. Listen, I was stumped to come up with the name, and we were getting to the point where the branding agency was like, hey man, we need to make the brand. You didn't pay us that much money. Like, we can't wait around forever. So I ended up doing some deep sort of geological and geographical research in Texas and wanted to come up with something that was unique. Really wanted a name that we could own. So we'd be surprised if anyone's actually heard of it, because it's a pretty obscure reference, but we love the origin of it. The origin is, it's one of the geological formations in the Paladero Canyon, which, people who aren't familiar, is one of the most beautiful sites in America. It's the second largest canyon in the States after that other big one. And it felt right. It kind of felt singular and plural, kind of has the first 2 and the last 2 letters of Texas. Just felt right, and we locked it down. So it's been fun to have a unique name that we could really build and own ourselves.
This is the side that we like to just kind of explore personal hobbies, traits, things you like to do. You enjoy sports. Sounds like you got a lot of passion for entrepreneurship, but just things you do in your free time or things you like to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm following college sports. Is pretty fun right now. Got season tickets to the Longhorns. I spend part of my year in Colorado now, so I do a lot of skiing and hiking,
Great.
fishing. So I really like being outside for as much of the year as possible. And Texas can get a little hot in the summer, so I try to spend more time in Colorado when the weather's more a little too hot here. I love art. I love traveling, and I got pretty into wine during COVID. I think a lot of people did, but I actually went pretty far down the rabbit hole, studied it, kind of stepped off that train a little bit. And
were you going to go full in?
I started doing the sommelier training and whatnot, and ended up took my foot off the gas pedal, but I did learn a lot. It's fun. I really just enjoy hospitality and learning all the different ways that places, people, and spaces can serve consumers. And so, I want to keep digging into that part of life. And, my creative muscle, I want to always be working out when it comes to building products and experiences that bring people joy. And so right now, scratching that itch with Tecovas, obviously, someday maybe some other ventures. I've always wanted to get into hotels. I know you're into the hotel game, and you know how challenging it is. Could be fun to explore that one day down the road. But right now I'm just having fun, helping Tecovas where I can, and living life.
We're in Austin. We always call this the real deal. My son, having gone to school, I learned about Ranch 616. What are kind of some of your local
joints? Man. So I love that. I'm friends with a lot of the chef community in town. I love dining. Texas is getting its first Michelin guide, so that'll be exciting. I'll give a shout out to Birdie's, maybe my favorite restaurant. Chef Tracy and her husband Arjav run an awesome place there. I love the Suerte and Este guys,
Yes.
Fermin and Sam. Nixta Taqueria over there as well, amazing. So that kind of northeast corridor just has amazing food right now. Love Kevin Fink and Tavel. They're running Hestia, Amaran Rye, Conjay, Izov. Got some San Antonio operations now, super talented. And then the Austin favorites, the McGuire Mormon Lambert group, and the Uchi group, the High Hospitality guys. We are so blessed with so many great places to spend time and eat and dine and drink and have fun and enjoy cool spaces and cool architecture. Larry Foles and all of his restaurants are also great. So it's been amazing how much Austin's grown in the last 10 years in terms of just what the consumers offered on the hospitality front.
If you think about Austin, what's the one thing people should see when they come to Austin? Besides
the Tecovas flagship store in South Congress?
100%.
I will say, obviously biased, but I know many people for whom that is a major stop. And because we offer we've got free alcohol and branding, and anyone who comes in gets their boots and their hats branded, and you're in the middle of this amazing little retail mecca there. Listen, you got to get some barbecue. You got to wait in line at Franklin, once in your life. You got to get breakfast tacos. And the breakfast taco, my preference is to get them from a food truck whose name is written in, tape or marker on the side. And catch a football game when the weather's nice. There's a lot to do here. Maybe the lake. The lake is probably maybe the most unique selling point of Austin versus the other cities in Texas.
And then lastly, what do you think the hidden gem of Austin is?
Ooh, the hidden gem. I don't know how hidden it is, but I'm a big fan of dive bars and honky tonks. And so Don's Depot is maybe the greatest bar on the planet. And if you go there on Friday and catch Don, who's in his 80s now, and he's still playing piano and singing right now, I'd say catch it while you can. That place is a beautiful institution and still feels like old Austin.
As we wrap up, where do we find you? Social handles? Tecovas.com.
Yeah, well, definitely Tecovas.com. It's the easiest place to find us. We've got a pretty fun Instagram too at Tecovas. I don't know how interesting it is to follow me, but you're welcome to Google it. But stop by one of our 42 retail stores and counting, and we'd love to serve you.
I appreciate your time today, and look forward to the future of Tecovas. It's a brand that's just blown up right before our eyes. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, Ward. Two of my favorite stores, including our highest volume store in the entire portfolio, is in one of your properties, and we're really excited to be there.
And we're glad that we're part of your success. So thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Backstory and Beyond, hosted by Ward Kampf. To learn more about Northwood Retail or the destinations from today's episode, visit backstorybeyond.com.